and welcome to Chapter 9. In Chapter 9, we're going to start working in JavaScript. You don't have to have previous coding experience to do this course, but if you have it, it does make your life a little bit easier. Some of this chapter and the chapter following will be review for you if you already have some coding experience. If you don't, that's okay. Remember to ask for help if you need it. Let's get started. First, we're going to go ahead and describe the difference between client-side and server-side scripting. There are two different types of scripting that we use in most of our driven websites or our scripted websites. Client-side scripting is run locally on your user's computer. So it's usually in JavaScript or some sort of scripting language, and it distributes the load for the script. So everything in the script gets run locally on the user's computer as opposed to being on the server. It responds quicker because you don't have to go over to the server and come back and over to the server and come back. But it does make it a little harder to access databases or data structures that are over on your server side. Server-side scripting is usually done in a different language, sometimes PHP or C# or F# or one of the other languages, over on the server itself. What happens is your code on your user's side is going to go over to the server to ask it to resolve the questions or to run the functions. And then it will come back to the client side or the user when it is all resolved. This is faster if you're using a database because it'll get all of the data from the database and send it over, as opposed to having to make that call back and forth for every database query that's done. However, it does use the resources on your server. So if you have a lot of people hitting that at the same time, it can slow down your server. Worst part with it is there's no offline use. You can't use it unless you can get to the server. A lot of sites are gonna use both, but in this course, we are just gonna be doing client-side scripting using JavaScript. Now, JavaScript is not Java. First off, Java and JavaScript, completely different languages, have nothing to do with each other. JavaScript is an interpreted language used for client-side scripting and is executed without a compiler, that's what it means by interpreted, using the browser to run through the script. Some languages require a compiler to compile the code and then run it. JavaScript doesn't. It's an interpreted language, so it's just a scripting language. When you use your JavaScript, it is often used as an external resource so that you can write all of your JavaScript in a singular file, the same way we do with our CSS, and then include it in your HTML page via a script tag. So the first script tag here has a source of TinyScript that it's going to go find the code from there and run all of that in the code. You can use embedded code directly in your HTML with the script tag. So you can do the script tags without a source and then write your code right in your HTML file. But as you've seen in this course, we like to keep things external so that you can keep your code separate. The first thing that we're going to do in our tinyclock.htm is add our script tag. So we are going to be using an external script. So we're going to give it our source file, which is going to be TinyScript, and it's a JS file, JavaScript. And we are going to tell it to defer because we actually don't want our script to run until the end of our code. And we're going to go ahead and have our closing script tag. And now our TinyScript will run. There's nothing in our TinyScript right now, so that doesn't do us any good, but we are going to go ahead and start writing our TinyScript code. When you load your page, we have the option of doing the default version of scripting, which loads the script as it finds it. So it's going to load some HTML. It's going to find a script and it's going to go, oh, wait, I have to stop for a second. I'm going to go load all of my script and run all my script, and then I'll go back and finish my HTML. That's the default. That's what normally happens. A lot of times people will put their script tags at the very top of their page before any of the HTML is implemented, or they'll put it at the very bottom of their page after all the HTML is done. But it will stop in the middle. So if you have a script tag in the middle of your HTML code, it will stop loading your HTML, run the script tag, and then come back. That's the default. You can choose to have your script run either asynchronously or deferred. So asynchronous means that it will load the script tag, but it will not execute it. It will not process the script immediately. So what it does is it'll load it along with the HTML, and then it will stop for a second, execute the code, and then go back and finish the HTML. So they'll be done at separate times. So you can't really be sure with an asynchronous code that it's going to be done at a certain point in your code. The last option is deferred, which is where the JavaScript is compiled, executed at the end after all of the HTML has been processed. You're going to see different reasons why this is useful, but in a lot of cases, you want all of your HTML to be in place so that you can modify it or access it from your JavaScript. So we like the deferred option. If you don't want to have any of your HTML processed yet, you can do the either the putting your script at the top of your code to make sure it all happens before your HTML is loaded. Yes, there are other scripting languages. There's VB Script and some others. In this class, we're just going to be talking about JavaScript. So don't think it's the only programming language out there that's a scripting language. There's more. This is just the most common and the one that we use the most in web development. You're now going to be creating your first JavaScript program, and generally we do a hello world. In this case, because we're doing our project, we're going to do a welcome to Tulsa. But this is your basic rules as far as JavaScript. First off, comments. Yes, you have to use comments in your code. Comments are either 2 slashes for single line of comment or a slash star star slash with comments inside of them. So both of those are acceptable for comments. I do a lot of the star slash slash stars. There's also a control KC and control KU to comment or uncomment specific sections. JavaScript is generally a series of commands that do something, and then they always end in a semicolon. You'll hear comments about semicolons for the rest of your life in programming. Semicolons in JavaScript, you need to have a semicolon at the end. Generally, your syntax rules include capitalization. JavaScript is case sensitive, which means there is a difference between a capital A alert and a lowercase a alert. Those are two completely different methods. By the way, the uppercase A alert isn't correct. You can't use that, and you'll get an error if you do. Most of your objects and most of your commands are going to start with a lowercase letter. There are specific reasons why we put uppercase letters, but in general, they're mostly going to be lowercase. Also, if you want to put a line break, in HTML, you've gotten pretty spoiled with line breaks, and you can put them in where you want and leave them, and it doesn't matter. But in JavaScript, line breaks matter. So if you need to have a line break in the middle of a string, you escape that with a slash character. So you can say welcome slash and then new line to Tulsa and have it work where it doesn't recognize that hard return, that new line character. Really important not to put in line breaks because it will get confused when the interpreter reads your code. To help you understand how JavaScript is going to run, we're just going to start with a basic welcome alert button. What this is going to do is when the page gets run, this code will be run at the end because we deferred it, and we're just going to tell our window object to make an alert. And this alert is going to take a piece of text, which is going to be our message, which is going to say, welcome to Tulsa. And don't forget the semicolon at the end. That's all the script does for right now. But what happens is when we hit refresh, it'll pop up this alert that says, welcome to Tulsa. We'll go ahead and say hello or okay, and then it'll work just fine. With any piece of code, it's very important for you to be able to debug your code. You're welcome to ask me for help in the first week or two, but I'm going to expect you to go in and debug your own code and learn how to use the debugger, how to use the watch lists, how to use breakpoints inside of your emulator. Basic error types. Again, if you've already done coding, you know this. If you don't, this might be new for you. There are 3 different types of errors that happen in code, and this goes for any language, not just JavaScript. The first we can call a syntax error or a load time error, which is where your syntax is wrong. You're missing a semicolon, you're missing a function name, something is your parentheses don't match correctly. There's actually, like, you typed something wrong. We call it syntax errors. It's generally considered the grammar errors. You messed up somewhere in your code. The next is what we call a runtime error. This is where it loads just fine, but something in your code breaks. So something happens when it's trying to run that is going to break the code. Everything syntactically is fine, but something in the way you've done your code is going to break it. This can be a divide by zero or trying to access a null value in a variable and things like that. So these are called runtime errors because you can only find them at runtime. If you ran through and checked your syntax is all fine. The last is what we call a logical error. And in this case, the code all runs fine, but it didn't do what you wanted it to do because your logic was actually wrong. And this is one of the biggest problems that people have in coding because they did everything right. All of their syntax is fine. It's not a syntactical error. It's actually what we call a semantic error or a logic error. Something in your code didn't make any sense. It didn't do what it was supposed to do. We tried to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and we didn't have any peanut butter. So it broke and everything syntactically was fine, but there was no peanut butter or something like that. You tried to spread peanut butter on bread, but you didn't have a knife and you didn't have a way to do that and it just didn't work right. So something in your logic got missed. This is where you have to go back to designing your program, thinking about how your program is going to be designed, and then re-editing or redesigning your code. When you go into your F12 DevTools in your browser, which we've done before, you can click on the sources file and you will see all of the sources, all of the files that are in your directory. Inside there, this is another reason why we like to use a different file for our code. You'll find your tiny script file or whatever file that you're going to be using. You can click on that file and you can view all of the lines in that file. You can break, adding a breakpoint. You can use the red squiggles to show you that there's code wrong. You can look at the little one with the red X in the top right-hand corner and know that you have an error. It's an uncaught exception. It's something wrong with your syntax. In this case, we did the alert with a capital A. The important thing to learn with programming, learn how to read your error codes. So if you look down at your uncaught type error, if you look to the right, you will see that it says from the script file with a colon and line 12. So you can go back to your line 12 in your VS Code, and that's where you should find the error. Now, the little red squigglies are going to give you syntax errors. They're going to give you load time errors. So if you ever run your page and you look at DevTools and you see a little red X with a little 1 or 2 or 7 next to it, you know you've got some syntax errors. You need to go fix those. JavaScript is technically not a strict language, and we have to tell our JavaScript that we want it to be strict, meaning that it will show up any of our syntax errors for us. Generally, it'll let you get away with a couple of syntax errors and it'll still load and it might even run okay, but you shouldn't be ever having code with syntax errors. One of the first things I'm going to do when grading your assignments is going to be running it and making sure that you have no syntax errors. If you have syntax errors, I'm going to bust you for those because that's not okay. You cannot be submitting code that has syntax errors. If you have a syntax error, make sure you ask for help because that's what I'm here for. So at the top of our script file, we are always going to write use strict because we want it to be strict. Like, you know, that mean old teacher, strict. You want it to be strict, and that's going to allow you to be able to find those syntax errors in your dev tools when you run your code. Really important to be able to do that. When you put in a page break, you're going to have the ability to go through that. So I'm going to show you a little bit about how to debug your code. Recognizing that alert is lowercase, because remember, case is very sensitive. So if I were to put in a capital A here for alert, it wouldn't run. In fact, you could come over to your dev tools and you would find this little one with an X on it, meaning that there was an error. And it's going to say uncaught type error window.alert is not a function because it's not a capital A, it's lowercase a. So if you are running some code and it doesn't run the way that you're expecting it to, make sure that you come and check your dev tools and see if there's any errors to help you find out. And here it's going to say at tinyscript, which is the name of our file, on the line number 12, which is right here. So it knows that we have that alert wrong. So now when we hit save and refresh, it'll say welcome to Tulsa, and that little alert is gone. One of the other things that you can do with your DevTools is insert a breakpoint. So if I come back over here to my code and I hit F12, so you can see here, I've got my tiny script file here, and I can kind of move these around to make it so that you can see them easier, hide the navigator, and just see this piece of code. A breakpoint, if you want to have it stop the code so that you can look at something, you can come over right next to the numbers, the line numbers, and click it, and it will add what is called a breakpoint at a specific point. When I refresh the code, it will stop at that breakpoint. It'll say paused in debugger. I'll make this a little bigger just so you can see it all. It'll say paused in debugger on your code over here, which is fine. And it's sitting here waiting for me to continue it. You can do things in here where you check values of different objects, things like that. But when we're finished checking things, stepping into and out of, we can click resume, and it'll go right past that point and call the code. So adding in breakpoints can be really, really easy, and can really help you with your code because you can look at what variables are as you're going along. It's really important to be able to do that. As we've said, JavaScript is not a strongly typed language, so we are going to use our strict JavaScript in here to make sure that when it tries to run, it's going to look for syntax errors for us when we refresh our page. And it's going to do that on purpose. Sometimes you can have runtime errors that are going to be a problem. It's really important to throw that strict in there ahead of time. So hopefully that got you started with session 1. Come back next time for session 2, and we'll keep going.